test track back here. It's the second largest test track in Indiana. The first largest one, of course, is the Indy 500. And in the middle of our track here is a retention pond. It's also a blue heron sanctuary. So it's very nice. We're a National Wildlife Federation wildlife habitat. 30 acres of prairie off onto the right side of this photograph here. And as we build and expand the facility, anything that we take up, we put back into prairie. So it helps to sequester CO2 and keeps the invasive species out, and it also just helps in the pollinators and the birds that come through. So I'll just a little bit by the numbers here. Lafayette, it's located in Lafayette, Indiana. There's about 5,700 associates at the facility, almost 4 million square feet and 32 acres. And since 2000, we have reduced the amount of waste we generate by by almost over 50%. Actually, we started at 459 pounds per vehicle, and today we're at 213 pounds per vehicle, and that's measuring the exact same things we measured started in 2000. So we haven't eliminated a category. That is the same amount. So it includes everything from steel, hazardous waste, special waste, cafeteria waste, pallets, plastics, anything you can think of. If it comes in the facility, it's and measured, and we can. It's really the best number because we're reducing the amount of waste that we have to generate. So we're reducing the amount of waste that's coming into the facility, the amount of material that has to be created. So it's really this is an excellent number, and probably my favorite number to present, really. In 2002, our parent company asked us, can you become zero landfill? And we'll give you 5 years to be able to do this. So we said, well, yes, we have no idea how to start this, but yes, this is what you want. This is what we'll do. We couldn't make a hybrid vehicle at the time, or a small portion of the auto industry, but we could make the car in a more environmentally friendly way. And so we looked first at reducing, reusing, and recycling. It's very that simple, really: reduce, reuse, recycle. And we went out to our associates and we said, this is our target. And what would you do in your little part of the world, in the part of the factory that you're standing in, that you're building this quality vehicle for us? What would you do that would be different, that would help the environment? And we have thousands and thousands and thousands of small ideas that have come together to help us reduce the amount of waste generating by over 50%. But also on May 4th, 2004, we became zero landfill. We sent our last load of material to a landfill. Since that time, we've not sent anything. Everything either has been reduced or reused in some way or recycled. We do send about 3% of our material that just can't be recycled, goes to a energy from waste facility in Indianapolis, Covanta Energy Services, and it gets used that way. We are constantly trying to reduce that 3% in finding different technologies and different products and different ways of doing things to be able to bring that number down. We also see an average over the years. We started at the very beginning in 2002 with doing environmental accounting, taking everything that we pay for this project and everything that we get back from it. And over the years, we've seen that we have an average benefit of over $1 million annually over the cost of the program. So when people say it costs too much to be environmentally friendly, we like to say it costs you too much not to be, because waste is money. And whenever you're generating waste, you're wasting money. And so really looking at these things, we measure what we manage what we measure. So looking at waste as another part of that business that we have to manage. And then also, this is very much an associate-driven program. As I said earlier, getting the ideas from our associates, having them help us implement those ideas has been wonderful. And they are the stars of our program. Without them, this wouldn't be working. And I think there comes a point in when you're you know, when you're promoted to maybe a manager or vice president or something, you feel like you have to have all the answers. But really, we can't have all the answers, and we have to look to our employees. They're the ones who live with us day in and day out, and they're very creative, and they're and just so happy to want to share their program. This is their program, and they take a great deal of pride in it. And I just wanted to kind of paint a picture of traditional America, what we're dealing with today. You know, Americans throw away 2.5 million plastic bottles an hour, which is amazing to me. The average American family tosses out over 1,100 pounds of food every year. We throw away 25 billion coffee cups, foam coffee cups in a year. It's amazing. The average American generates 4.1 pounds of waste per day, and there's 328 million Americans. That's over 1.3 billion pounds of waste a day, and only about 34.5% of that gets recycled, or about 4.6 million pounds of waste gets recycled every day out of the 1.3 billion that's generated. And that's just so disheartening, and it's so daunting when you think of it in that way. But really, we can all make a difference. And what Subaru did, I'll forward here to this next one, Subaru in the national parks. So in 2015, the national parks were generating over 1 million pounds of trash, and that doesn't include what the concessionaire waste was. We estimate that maybe that number could be 3 times as much of that. We chose 3 pilot parks to trial our Subaru principles in, and those 3 pilot parks were Denali, Yosemite, and Grand Teton. And in that year, 2015, with the concessionaires, they generated 16.6 million pounds of waste, and that was enough to fill the Washington Monument 62 times. So those were just 3 parks. But granted, they're very iconic parks that are heavily visited throughout the year. And well, with the exception of Denali, they're only open about 110 or 120 days a year because of their weather. But Grand Teton and Yosemite especially is visited a lot throughout the year. So people ask us, excuse me here for a moment. Oops. People ask us all the time, back here, why a car company? What does a car company have to do with the national parks? And that's probably the question I get asked the most. And in 2016, I'm sorry, for the anniversary of the National Park Service, we were a premier partner, and which meant that our logo and our name got put on everything that went out about the centennial. And we were one of the largest, and still continue to be the largest contributor to the National Park Foundation. And we have a wonderful partnership with them. But we wanted to give more to the national parks than just our cash, and we wanted to do something more, something that would last the next 100 years. And so we thought, can we take the principles that we've learned from the Subaru plant in Indiana and apply those to the national parks? Granted, it's different, and the national parks are not a business. They're, you know, it's very hard to manage what comes into the parks as opposed to the manufacturing plant where we have control over everything that comes into there. But what can we do, and how can we help? And so we started this project. We provided grants every year since 2015. We've provided grants to the national parks to help with infrastructure and employees and testing and studies and anything that we've had to do to help with this program. And this picture here actually was taken by my nephew, and it's the famous Grizzly 399 in the Grand Teton National Park and her cub. And that was taken a couple years ago, and unfortunately that cub was killed by a speeder in the national park as it was going through. And so I always like to caution people when you're driving through these national parks or national forests or any public land, please slow down and give the wildlife the room they need. But I always thought that was a very beautiful picture of her. She's a very famous grizzly bear in the Grand Teton. She's the daughter of Grizzly 610, which is another famous grizzly bear, but you can look it up later. So when we went into these national parks, there were some things that were very common. that we did. So we did a baseline waste characterization study, or as I like to call it, just a dumpster dive, really. Um, just going in and finding out what is in their waste stream, what's it made up of, what are people doing with it, how are they recycling, how much are they recycling, where are they recycling the best, and look, so it gives us a really good inventory. All roads lead back to a good inventory. So we really wanted to see what that was. And we find that the largest portion of the waste stream is food waste. So after that, then it becomes plastics, pallets, and all from the back of the house. But it's really basically the same things that we're throwing away in our homes, we're throwing away in our national parks. So we wanted to first improve the infrastructure. So we started co-locating the containers. So we had the trash containers co-located next to all the recycling containers, making it just as easy to recycle as it is to throw it in the trash container. And then we started forming community committees and getting the community involved. So we invited in the landfill people, the recycling people, the Chamber of Commerce, the hotels, the restaurants, anyone who that deals with the national parks, and getting everyone's view on how they can help and what it is they could do. And then you have this huge consortium of people then all pulling in the same direction. And it's been a wonderful journey to watch all people come out and really work together in their community to make their community better, to make the national parks a better place for all the visitors that come there every year. Then we went to standardized labeling on our containers. We use Recycle Across America. It's an organization, a nonprofit, who is working to standardize all the labels so that when you're out anywhere, be it an airport or a stadium or a national park, that you can look at those labels and they're familiar to you. So you don't have to think long. It becomes kind of automatic that you know where to put your plastic bottle or where to put your food waste or your paper cup. So working with them, standardizing, we found at the facility in Indiana, standardizing everything was very, very important. We standardized there by color. So red was where our pop cans went, our soda cans. Green was where the soda bottles went. So I'm not sure what happened if you were colorblind, but everything was standardized by color. Working with the local and national stakeholders, as I kind of mentioned earlier, with those people who have a stake in the national parks. And also working with companies like REI and Clean Canteen and LK. They've been wonderful partners for us in spreading the message of what we're trying to do. LK is helping put in water bottle filling stations for us. Clean Canteen is helping us with reusable water bottles for visitors when they go to the national park. So it really is about forming this community of people who value our national treasures and who want to help with this project. And then also employee engagement programs within the park, the National Park Service, and with the concessionaires, and helping and doing the same thing that we did at the plant, where we've engaged our employees into coming up with ideas, doing that same thing with the national parks, because the people who work there and that are visit there, people who volunteer, they have some great ideas. So helping them have an avenue to share those ideas and then implement those ideas, which has been really a very nice project. And it helps everyone, it becomes everyone's project at that point. And not just, we never wanted this to be a Subaru project. We want this to be the Grand Teton project or the Denali project or the Yosemite project. We just want it to be able to help. And some of the results, the parks are doing a great job. Each park has doubled the, oh, let me go back to this. This is also Grand Teton. This photograph is Swambacher Landing. So if you ever get there, please go there at sunset or sunrise. It's beautiful. But also some of the results. So each park has doubled its recycling rate, which is amazing, really, to increase it by 50%. The parks have reduced the amount of waste per visitor to the point where last year they saved 6.5 million pounds of waste from being generated. So we're doing what we did at the facility in Indiana. We're normalizing the amount of waste that's being generated by the amount of visitors coming in. So we can see how our messaging is working. Are people bringing their own reusable bottles? Are they bringing their coffee cups? Are they opting out of paper maps and things like that? So this is really a good way to help measure that. All three of the pilot parks have created youth programs, so we're reaching out to the next generation, getting those ideas, getting those people, getting those youth, getting the young people involved in this program, and it gives them wonderful experience. They can talk about it in their college essays, or they can talk about it in their job interviews, but they have something that they created and something they did here at the national parks. We're utilizing TerraCycle to help recycle some of the snack wrappers and those hard to recycle items. Denali uses this a lot. You ride the bus through to Denali National Park, and so there's a lot of snack wrappers. There's 135,000 snack wrappers last year that were recycled. Our Subaru retailers, also through our Subaru Loves the Earth program, our Subaru retailers will collect snack wrappers, K-cups, and then they'll take that and recycle those into park benches and playground equipment and things like that that they then donate back out to the communities. And it's a wonderful project that a lady that I work with at the office has been doing, and she just does an incredible job getting all these things in place. And then again, community involvement in education has really been the key to this program, making it everyone's program. And this photograph was taken behind, it's in Grand Teton also, behind the superintendent's home, and it's a beautiful duck pond and beaver pond, actually. And then how can you be part of the solution? Because you're coming to the public lands and the national parks and your state parks and city parks. So what can you do to help? And we would urge you to bring your own bottle and coffee mug so that it can be refilled. Opt out for those maps and paper receipts. Go digital if you can. When camping, bring your own reusable containers and take care not to waste your food. Really, I mean, children are going hungry every night, going to bed hungry, and we're wasting 40% of our waste stream is food waste. And it also generates methane gas when we'll put it into our landfills. So really be careful. If you're going to buy it, eat it. Bring your own shopping bags when you go shopping in the parks. Leave no trace. If you pack it in, pack it out. And we've been a partner of Leave No Trace for 20 years now, and they're a wonderful outdoor ethics organization that I would encourage you to go to their website and see. And if you could, find some alternatives if you're camping. Find alternatives to the propane canisters. They're very hard to recycle, and they're very expensive for the parks. It actually costs the parks more to recycle that propane canister than it does for you to buy it. So if you can't, take it back home and recycle it in a more proper way. And always remember, hashtag don't feed the landfills. This photograph here was taken on the north shore of Molokai, Hawaii. So that's the sunrise in Molokai. And I know we'll have questions, I think, later, Dilip, correct? And so I wanted to leave you with my contact information if you needed anything. And of course, this photograph is sunset in Grand Tetons in the famous Mormon barn there. So that's all I have. So Dilip, I'll put it back to you.
Thank you so much, Denise. Please join me in
thank you. I can hear
it. We will hold questions till the end. I have asked people to post their questions and comments in the chat box, and so hopefully along the way they'll be doing that. But without further ado, I would like to transition us to Dennis so we can learn about a very long journey of Saint Gobain, one of probably the oldest existing companies in the world. And to find you in the panel, to make you the presenter now, Dennis.
Okay.
And it should be transitioning to you anytime now.
Okay.
I think you are now the presenter. Yes.
Yep. Oh, back to the beginning here. Okay.
Terrific.
All right. So as Dilip mentioned, my name is Dennis Wilson. I'm Director of Sustainability and Environmental Health and Safety for a company called Saint Gobain or Saint Gobain, depending on what part of the world you come from. I'll talk a little bit about Saint Gobain in a minute here, but I thought I'd start with this slide. I hope the animation is working on your end, but you know, it's temperature anomalies by country starting at the turn of the century, and you'll notice a few points here that you know, things start to change a little bit and then change pretty drastically. In the spirit of this being Earth Day, I bring this up just because to keep in mind kind of what we're all trying to do here. Carbon is a big focus for us. During this COVID situation, we've seen a little drop in that, and you know, we're trying to do what we can as a company to make sure that the recovery that we come back with here considers things like this. So just kind of keeping in perspective. So just about Saint Gobain, overall, we are in fact not a church. Not that there's anything wrong with that. We are a 355-year-old French company. This picture here is actually the mirrors that were made for the Hall of Mirrors in the Palace of Versailles. So that was Saint Gobain's first job overall. So we've been in continuous operation since 1665. So pretty rich history of the company. Louis XIV is basically the person that incorporated us as a company. So we have documents in Paris that have Louis XIV's signature on them. Worldwide, Saint Gobain is about 180,000 employees in 67 countries. Our footprint in North America is we have about 160 manufacturing locations. We do a lot of different things, make a lot of different products that I'll talk about here in a minute. About 41 billion euros in sales in 2018, one of the top 100 industrial companies in the world. So just a little background on us. Almost 80% of our turnover comes from the construction market. So things like building glass, where we started, insulation. So if you've heard of a company, Certainteed is one of our companies. Wall board, ceilings, mortars, roofing, siding, pipe, insulation, all of these things. But we also make things like windshields for cars and seals for the automotive industry. We have a life sciences business that makes everything from Tygon tubing to process vessels that are in the manufacturing environment for pharmaceuticals and vaccines and that kind of thing. So our primary business is in the building products market, though, and as a building products company, there's a big responsibility that goes along with that. So the construction sector accounts for, and buildings themselves account for, about 33% of energy consumption in the world, and about 39% of the greenhouse gas emissions that are out there. So, you know, a lot of that is accounted for in things like concrete and steel, but we make things like glass, we make things like insulation, we make things like gypsum, we do things like cook rock, melt sand, all of which take a lot of energy to produce. So we both, on the end of manufacturing, we have a big footprint, but we also have a big responsibility because these buildings are there for decades and need to operate in such a way that they're saving energy, reducing carbon emissions. We also have to be cognizant as a manufacturer of things like embodied carbon, which I'll talk about here in a little bit as well. So Saint Gobain's overall brand strategy is around sustainability and comfort. Sustainability is pretty self-explanatory, addressing tomorrow's collective challenges through sustainable buildings, better mobility, resource efficiency, these kind of things, but also doing it in such a way that people want to use these products and live in these spaces and be in these automobiles and that type of thing. If it's a terrible experience, it doesn't matter how sustainable it is because people won't actually use it. So performance, safety, adaptability, accessibility in the form of affordability and beauty are a few things that we also focus on as a company. Screen seems to be frozen here. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit more in depth, just to be sure you guys are seeing this slide that says sustainability CSR, correct? Okay, all right. A little more in depth about us as a company. This is actually an example of our 2017. So for the 2018 year, we just had our newest report come out. It's our annual report, but our annual report also serves as our corporate social responsibility report. We're a European company of a certain size, so there's a directive in the European Union that says if you meet some of these requirements, you have a duty to inform investors on things like social, environmental, factors, things that could produce risk that an investor would need to know about before they decide to invest in your company. So these are considered non-financial metrics that we report in this annual report, and they have to be around things related to environmental matters, social employee related matters, human rights, anti-corruption, and bribery. So this is a core part of who we are. It's the materiality piece of things that we feel that if you're going to invest in a company like Saint Gobain, you need to know these things. So something that we're proud of, and hopefully you've seen something like this. This is a materiality assessment. This is our materiality assessment for the company as a whole. And you see things in the upper right-hand corner here, which should be the things that are the most strategic to us as a company, and also the most important to our stakeholders. Things like energy efficient solutions, reduction of carbon footprint, responsible purchasing, responsible advocacy practices, health and safety. All of these things are really important to us as a company, so important that they're considered to be at the top of the list when it comes to what's material for our company. Be stuck here again. Something else I wanted to mention, just because I know that this issue comes up from time to time, and hopefully it's more and more of a discussion, is the investment community as it relates to sustainability. This is Saint Gobain's overall ownership structure, and you can see in here a few companies maybe you'll recognize. One of which is this Wendell company. No matter what company is out there these days, they've typically got some sort of position when it comes to corporate social responsibility, sustainability, and the like. And you can see here on Wendell's list, which is one of our biggest institutional investors, safety, incorporating environmental considerations into the design of products and services, or eco-design. The larger one that I wanted to focus on, though, is BlackRock. There was quite a bit of news in the last few months before the COVID situation started around Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, and some things that they're doing to really put sustainability, corporate social responsibility, governance at the forefront of their investing strategy. So BlackRock owns a large chunk of Saint Gobain, and personally, as someone that's internally responsible for the topic, I think this is a great additional driver, and it just goes to show that this is good business. So this is from his letter in 2019. Sustainable investing was once viewed as a trade-off between value and values, yet today it's something investors can no longer afford to ignore. What's changed? More granular data, more sophisticated analysis, shifting societal understanding of sustainability, as well as growing awareness of certain factors. So it's become something that you really can't ignore. And BlackRock has some very strong data around the fact that not only can't you ignore it, but the companies that actually pay a lot of attention to it are the companies that do better from an overall financial perspective. So this is the core of our business. Our CEO, Pierre-André de Chalendar, wrote a book about climate change going into the COP21 event in Paris. That's on the left-hand side here. This is the French, American version, or I'm sorry, an English version as well. Some other groups that we're involved in, we're on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, FTSE for Good. We, like a lot of companies, report to CDP. We've recently set science-based targets. And when the US pulled out of COP21, we signed the We Are Still In pledge. This is an interesting article. Philip has copied my slides after this, but our CEO wrote in the Financial Times an article on how we connect our core values and sustainability to the long-term value of Saint Gobain as a company. So it's an interesting read if you get a chance to take a look at that. And just some other organizations, I'm not going to go through the list here, but that we're involved in. Since the COP21 event was in Paris, our CEO took a leadership role in the Business and Climate Summit, which helped to plan the COP21 event. So we were pretty proud of that fact. So I wanted to dive a little bit further into what sustainability really means to us from a boots on the ground perspective, how we actually look at the subject. So I wanted to start with product sustainability. We're in the building products market. Hopefully you've all heard of leadership in energy and environmental design, the LEED, United States Green Building Council program. I personally am a member of the Materials and Resources Technical Advisory Group for LEED. And this is one of the things that we worked really hard on in LEED. The fourth version of LEED that came out was credits that actually give incentive to manufacturers to not only to tell you what the environmental attributes of their product are, but to actually do things about them. So in this case, looking at a product's environmental footprint through a tool called life cycle assessment and an environmental product declaration, which is the output of a life cycle assessment, and then showing physical improvement in those things. So things like reduced numbers when it comes to global warming potential, depletion of the ozone layer, eutrophication, acidification, these kind of things. So actually putting your money where your mouth is. So this life cycle assessment process that I talked about before, it's looking at everything from digging up raw materials out of the ground, through processing those materials, all the way through end of life, which hopefully involves being able to bring that material back as a raw material for your process. This is an example of some of the work that my team does. So the outside of this spider graph here is the baseline for a product that we have that we did a life cycle assessment study on, and there are various metrics that we measure in this case. We did some incorporation of eco-design practices. We incorporated some recycled content, changed some of the raw materials, and then the green inner part of this graph is what we turned out at the end. So this data that we generate from things like life cycle assessments really give us a roadmap for how we approach environmental improvement, both in our processes, in our plants, and in our products themselves. They give us what to shoot for. There are also credits in these various systems for health. So are you paying attention to the chemicals that are going into your product? What type of potential health hazards are there for these things? So I'm on the board of an organization called the Health Product Declaration Collaborative. That group has a system called the HPD, or Health Product Declaration, that tells you a little bit about the materials that are in a product and the potential hazards that are associated with those materials from a health perspective. So the goal is for a manufacturer to tell you these things, and then over time, again, look at those things, the things that could be, a carcinogen or some type of health hazard, and work long-term on removing those things for those products. And there's lots of systems to incentivize manufacturers to do that these days. And on top of that, from a regulatory perspective, there's no shortage of either private systems, public systems, regulatory issues that are telling all of us that we need to make these changes to reduce these materials from our products. So it's in our best interest as a manufacturer to pay attention to these things, and again, use them as a roadmap for product and process development. So I have a product stewardship team that a large part of their job is to look at these materials that are in our products, understand what the impact is from a health perspective, and then to improve those materials. And we're seeing this in practice. So this is an example of a new tool called EC3, or the Environmental Carbon Calculator for Construction. It was developed by Skanska and the Carbon Leadership Forum up in Washington. Microsoft is actually using this tool to select products that are going into a rebuild of their campus. So they're looking at what the tool does is it looks at the materials that go into a building to understand the amount of carbon that's embedded in the material. So the amount of energy it took to produce a material that's going to end up in a product. Largely that comes from steel and concrete, but there are a lot of other products. So presumably you can look at one material and then compare it to another and understand what the embodied carbon of that material is. So we're seeing this used in practice. It's being used for selection of products. So as a manufacturer, it's in our best interest to pay attention to those things. Through this organization at the bottom here called Materials Can, our company and a number of others are advocating for manufacturers to really pay attention to this embodied carbon number. If you look at embodied carbon from the perspective of meeting the 2050 goals that were set for COP21, we have to pay a lot more attention to the amount of carbon that goes into products and not just the operational carbon of buildings. So that's another reason why this system exists. We're seeing customers like the AIA, American Institute of Architects, now say things like ignoring sustainability is officially unethical for their members, and that architects are now required to inform their clients of potential environmental impacts of the buildings that they put together. So transparency was really the first step for us, right? So we do things like product baseline carbon footprints. We ensure that data is correct by doing third-party verification of the data. Systems like LEED give points to projects that use products that make data available about the products, and then architects specify those products. So over the last 2 years, that's been the system. Now we're in a situation where manufacturers are being pushed to improve the numbers that they see in these documents. And systems like LEED now give more points to manufacturers for products that are used that show an improvement in environmental performance over time. And then architects and specifiers are more and more pushed to use products that show a reduced environmental footprint over time. So beyond that, I mentioned this embodied carbon calculator tool that helps architects and specifiers select better products. So we're seeing tools evolve that make the selection of the right materials a lot easier for architect specifiers, anybody that's in that chain of building a new building. So I just wanted to finish out with a couple discussions, or a couple slides on process sustainability. So we have I mentioned we have 160 plants in North America. We have a sustainability network. Every single one of our sites has someone at the site that is responsible for environmental reduction of the overall process there. So goals around wastewater, energy, CO2 reduction. We call that WWE. So as you can see in the middle of the screen here, we try and make these things fun. So we have belts that we give out to our plants for sites that have the best programs around reduction of carbon, waste, water, energy. We have a network event that we get together at once a year, and we hand these belts out along with professional wrestler like sunglasses and those kind of things, and we make a big production out of them coming up. They give a little kind of smack talk video against the other plants as to why they're going to defend their belt and that type of thing. So we try and use these things to make reduction and working on these topics fun within our plants. So that's this annual sustainability summit that we put out, as well as a newsletter to all of our plants. Like a lot of companies, we have goals. So our short-term goals for 2025 are 15% energy reduction, 20% CO2 reduction. As I mentioned before, as a company that does things like melt sand and cook rock, those numbers are pretty big. So us making those reductions have a very significant impact. And by 2050, we've made a commitment to be net zero, which is for a company that has a lot of thermal load in doing all this melting of things. That's a pretty big, ambitious target for us. So we're already working on those things. Investments that we're making today will lead to our zero net carbon goal by 2050, and that's our CEO Pierre-Andre de Chalendar that made this commitment a few months ago. And then lastly, I wanted to just mention this. This is something that we just recently did. We signed a 120 megawatt virtual power purchase agreement it's the equivalent of taking about 68,000 cars off the road a year. So pretty proud of this. It took quite a while to get done. If you've ever heard of one of these deals, it's a pretty complex thing, but will reduce our carbon from at least electricity in North America by a pretty substantial amount over the next several years. And then lastly, this wouldn't be 2020 if I didn't mention the COVID situation. This is again an announcement from our CEO Pierre-Andre de Chalendar on Europe has a green recovery plan that they put together that they are asking companies to sign on to, which we have. I really think it's great in this situation that we're in, that we're thinking about this topic, that it's top of mind, and as we're coming back, the 2030 goals that the European Union has around this topic are still being kept in mind, and we're doubling down on those to some extent. Being part of a European company, we will see the fruits of this in North America as well. So I'm really excited about that. We're keeping this topic in mind as we will emerge from this crisis. So I'll go ahead and stop there. Dilip has my contact information, so if there's anything I can do to help, please feel free to reach out to me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis. That was very good. Wonderful. Thank you so much. We have some time for Q&A, folks, and so we probably can take questions a couple of ways. There is one question in the chat box for Denise, but you can also raise your hand if you like, and I will call on you. So the question, Denise, is, I know baseline data is very important regarding the waste audits, dumpster diving. Did Subaru employees conduct the audit, or was the company contracted? Are there EHS OSHA considerations? Was it easy to do? Any recommendation, best practice for conducting one on campus? That's the question that was posed.
When we did the dumpster dive, so to speak, at the facility, at the plant in Indiana, that was done by us. When we did the waste characterization study at the parks, we used a company to do that for us. We are looking at doing that again this year, another one to close up the project to see what the difference has been in the last 5 years. And so we are using a company for that as well. But it's not, if you wanted to do one at your campus, you know, I'd be happy to send a kind of a template that we have that we use that could be used for that. You can do it yourself. It's not something that's really difficult to do. It's not always pleasant. It could be messy, but it's not really difficult. And you know, you just need a scale and some tarps and some bags and rubber gloves and apron or something to cover your clothes. But you can do it yourself, and I'd be happy to send that out.
I have a related question. I know you referenced TerraCycle as one of your recycling vendors, if you will. There have been various reports in the news about the price of recycled materials going down significantly over the past few years, which may have an impact on the secondary market. Have you had trouble finding markets for your recycled materials, or is it something where you have to pay people to take it, or how bad is it getting?
It's gotten very bad since China has put up the fence that says they're not taking our basically we're sending them trash, and they warned us and we didn't heed their warnings, and then they shut us off, and now we're scrambling to find out what we do with all the material that we're generating because we didn't invest in infrastructure. So it has been difficult. Some of the things TerraCycle really has a very niche market, so they are helpful in like cigarette butts and fishing line and snack wrappers and K-cups and those things that are just really hard to recycle that no one else really wants. But when it comes to the municipal solid waste, glass is an incredibly hard thing to recycle right now. So at the parks, that's making a difference in our numbers. Lots of the plastics, really number one, and 1 and 2 plastics really are about the only thing that they're recycling. You know, cardboard, it has to be dry, it has to be baled, it has to be really nice. Paperboard is hard to find. What's happening is the price of those commodities are coming down, but the transportation of those commodities is the same, or even sometimes higher. So then used to, if you could break even, you never made money in recycling, but if you could break even and have your transportation covered by the money you're getting back from your recycling, you were doing really well. If you could even get a little bit more in return, that was excellent. But so when you couple all, it's kind of a perfect storm, really. I'm hopeful that we will invest in an infrastructure and start recycling more, and because it really, but again, recycling is the last part of that. We really need to think about reducing what we generate, you know, just consuming less and reusing where we can, you know, reuse containers instead of getting plastic bags. I mean, every plastic bag that we've used for a sandwich in our lifetime is still in existence. So think of all those lunches that you had at school that your sandwich came in a plastic bag. It's still there. So use a reusable container. You know, simple things that we can do make a huge difference when everyone does it. You know, there's 331 million visitors to the national parks every year. If all of those 331 million visitors just stopped using it, you know, just brought their own reusable water bottle or their own coffee cup, huge difference that would make. So we have it within our own command to make a huge difference.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, Philip, if I could just add something to that real quick. I mean, we've seen a similar issue in recycling in general, and it's why, like, I have this thing that I've said for a number of years, that you hear all this talk about circular economy, and unfortunately most of the talk about circular economy is the only thing that's circular about circular economy is, like, we talk about it and it never happens, and we talk about it and it never happens. I mean, it really is about design and not about finding homes for things at the end of their life. Like, was the material actually designed to be a raw material for something else? So I think that's a mindset change that I think we all need to ensure makes its way into product development. That because the holes where you put stuff always dry up, for one reason or another. To Denise's point, you never made money on the stuff. You were just hoping to find something that worked for some period of time until it didn't anymore. So it's why circular economy is a thing, and why it's so hard.
I agree, Dennis. We really do need to design for sustainability.
Yeah.
Does 100% of your trash go to Covanta Energy? Dane is asking. Not sure. Covanta Energy.
Is that for me? No, only about 3% of what we generate there at the facility in Indiana goes to waste to energy. And we are constantly looking at ways to reduce that 3% even. So when we started in 2004, we were sending about 8% to energy from waste. And now we're down to 3%. And it's a constant struggle we're finding, different technologies, different ways of reusing things, different ways to reduce things as each model of the car changes. So it's a constant back and forth, really.
Mark is asking, what can we do to build local markets for recyclables? At this point, anybody can jump in. I know we have Jordan here who also has expertise in solid waste and recycling. So feel free to
Dennis, you
jump
want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, I go back to kind of what I said before about, the markets are only as good as the market for the material that you're trying to find a home for, which unfortunately dry up from time to time. I mean, co-locating facilities in such a way where maybe the waste from one facility can be used as another, as a raw material, which we have examples of that. We make a synthetic gypsum product that takes waste from power plants that we can actually make into essentially chemically the same thing as natural gypsum. Co-locating those in such a way where that stuff's not going into a landfill and is actually used as a raw material as a plant. That's one way to do it, but it's really hard, especially for things like plastics right now. As inexpensive as they are, as inexpensive as the raw material for plastics is, it's really tough. So it's systems thinking.
I'd offer also that wherever you're living, check with your waste hauler and see what actually is getting recycled, and don't be one of those hopeful recyclers where you put everything in the recycling because you just know it's going to get recycled, because that causes more problems than you'll ever know. And so really just put in your recycling containers what can be recycled. Pizza boxes cannot be recycled. They don't want the grease, they don't want the cheese. They'll go in your trash. I know it makes us feel better when we think that we're recycling the majority of the things that we're generating, but we're really not. That stuff is going and having to be separated somewhere. And when you've added labor now to a commodity that has a very low margin, now you've really ruined the system. So really make sure that your recycling is clean, you've put it in the right containers, and when in doubt, put it in the trash, because you're better off that way.
One thing I would just add to that, we talked a little bit about the dumpster dive exercise. A number of our plants, they work with larger waste handlers like Waste Management or Republic. If you're a large organization, you're probably have a relationship with one of these companies. They will come out and actually help you do that. Waste Management puts on a giant event every year that it's a golf tournament out in Arizona, and everything in that event it's a zero waste event, which is a really, really big event for something to be zero waste, but a lot goes into understanding what's coming in, what they allow people to bring in, what goes out, how it goes out, those kind of things. So those companies do a lot to help you figure those things out. They've helped our plants. We've had waste management people in pretty much every single one of our plants to help us, figure out these tough challenges. It's possible. It's just, it takes a lot of work, and it's something that you have to constantly kind of keep up on as the markets change.
Dennis, you have another question. Does Saint Gobain try to manufacture products that are red list free, which is the chemicals on the red list?
Yes. So this is part of the Living Building Challenge program. Those declare labels are one things that you can actually produce out of this. I mentioned I'm on the HPD Collaborative, which is a different organization, but has a similar goal around healthy materials. So yeah, we have a number of products that are red list free. The challenge there is that the red list has larger chemical families, and you really have to understand very much like what's in your product to a very, very very small level in order to really be able to say that it's red list free. And I'd say the challenge to that is that there are a lot of common materials out there that have red list materials in them. Doesn't necessarily mean that there's an exposure to the person that that is using that product because it's chemically found in the product. But I mentioned before about our product stewardship program. This is one of the metrics that we look at when we're doing product design is something on the red list. Is it possible for us to avoid those materials? In some cases, it's not, because the only option for a material is something that has a red list material in it. And this is really where innovation design come in. Can you find a alternative to that? And on top of that, can you actually find an alternative that there's enough data about that it's actually safer? There are a lot of changes that are made with materials from time to time where you have something that maybe it's not on the list, but it's just not on the list because there isn't enough information known about that material to say that it's actually safer. So it is a very useful exercise, but it's an exercise that you're swapping one CAS number out for another just to avoid the list. So so absolutely something that we look at often and something that we use in our product stewardship process.
Victoria actually has a question for everybody. We can all brainstorm here. When it comes to food waste, besides composting and buying less, how can we handle it? Are there nonprofits that take food from events like weddings and that have a lot of leftovers and serve to homeless people? I believe there are such organizations, but a number of health codes in that regard that I personally don't know about. And what about an average home's food waste? What do average homes do? I know a lot of people are composting these days, but what else can be done? So that's an open question to everybody.
The national parks have done a great job with their composting, but before, again, composting is kind of it's like recycling, it's the end of that line. What they've done is, if it hasn't gone out to and been around here, so you're doing a buffet or a banquet and you have some chicken or something left, if it hasn't been put out for people, then that can be given to the kitchens for people, for needy people to eat. If it has been put out and it's not been all used, there's hog farms that can go to. Composting, is a great way to get rid of what's left. But again, just not generating it to begin with is always the best way. At home, composting, I don't know. That's what I do. So I'm not sure what else there is to do. I try not to waste. And I have a golden retriever, so I don't, if I don't eat it, so another form of composting, I guess.
This is a really interesting topic right now, because if you've followed what's happening like in the Midwest, where they're tilling crops under because there isn't enough demand right now, it just goes to show you how much food is wasted, through catering services and food being brought into companies and that kind of thing. None of that's happening right now, so it's all rotting in fields somewhere, and they're tilling it under. While at the same time, we have like record lines of people showing up at food banks, miles long. It's a really sad topic, and I am hoping that if there's an additional positive thing that comes out of this COVID situation, is that we take a harder look at those type of things, because composting is part of the solution, but in our case, in our cafeteria in Malvern, our relationship through Sodexo, who manages this with us, they they manage a composting program that they have. One other thing that I'll just mention, there's an organization in the greater Philadelphia area called Trellis for Tomorrow that works with companies to set up corporate gardens that, in the case of our garden, and full disclosure, we have a garden and I'm on the board of this organization, but they take food that comes out of this garden. So it's a wellness thing that your employees can do to raise food, learn how to garden, but all of the food goes to local food banks. Even during the situation, we're still doing the garden, social distance, of course, and all of that food will go to local food banks for people that really need fresh food. So just maybe something to take a look into, because I feel like the situation is completely flipped at the moment, where maybe not as much food waste, but the food waste that we have is coming because all of those outlets that were previously wasting it aren't there anymore.
Mhm. I would agree. I think we need to think globally and act locally. And really, Subaru has a community garden too that goes to the kitchens that that need it. But we really do need to think about what are we buying? It used to be you didn't have watermelon in January. Do we really need watermelon in January? Because we're virtually importing water from a country that probably doesn't have much water, and we're importing it in so we can have a watermelon in January. So really eating seasonally, buying locally, supporting your local farmers and your local organic farmers if you can. But I really do think that that's a very important way to help with that largest part of the waste stream, which is food waste.
Joanna says, buy ugly produce, which is true. I actually read about a young woman entrepreneur in Charleston, and she's opened a restaurant, which is a big hit. And the restaurant uses only ugly produce. And I read an article about it in I think, Entrepreneur magazine. So people are being enterprising in many ways about these things. Just because a banana has a spot on it doesn't mean it can't be eaten.
Right.
This is true. Dennis, a quick question about Saint Gobain. Of course, it's a global multinational company, and I know that the Europeans are generally much more aggressive with a number of regulations, environmentally and so on, in terms of what they need. I'm assuming you use those globally. You use the higher levels globally, even if the regs are lower in some U.S. states or in the U.S. You use the highest standard globally. Is that how it
We
works?
do, yeah, and that includes on the health side of things too. Generally, if there's a health standard that's out there, we use as sort of a corporate standard we use across the board. There are some challenges that we have just on a regional basis, like in Europe, it's a lot easier to recycle some materials. The markets are a lot better. There are a lot less places to put it, which makes the price of putting it in a landfill somewhere a lot more expensive. So there are some local specificities that prevent us from doing that kind of across the board. But yes, I mean, generally when it comes to meeting environmental regulations or something like that, we're taking the higher standard. So.
And Denise, is the future of transportation going to be all electric, as they promise us, that the internal combustion engine will almost disappear in about 10 to 20 years? Are we on track for that?
It sure looks like it's heading that way. Yes,
Yeah.
it does. And yeah, I'm probably not the one qualified at Subaru to speak about that, but yes, it does. It appears that that's the direction we're all heading.
So many changes coming. It is now 2 o'clock. I see no other questions in the chat box, and so we are exactly 1 hour in. And please join me in thanking both Denise and Dennis for taking the time to be with us today virtually. And this was very, very
Thank
informative.
you.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Everybody have a very happy Earth Day.
You too.
50th Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day.
Take care. By the way, I think I told you both, I didn't mention it earlier, but I put in a chat box. I did record the session. I hope that's okay with both of you.
Sure. No problem.
Yes.
And,
Thank you.
Yeah, no
so
problem.
it might be viewed later by students. So thank you so much, Denise. Thank you so much, Dennis.
Yeah.
A pleasure seeing you.
Thank you.
even
Thanks,
though
Denise.
it's the screen, and I hope we
Yeah,
can
it's
meet
nice
in
meeting you.
person someday soon.
Sounds
I hope
good.
so. Next year.
Yes.
Take care.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Hi, Susanna. Were you able to catch the last bit of this? Earth Day. Um, you can turn it off. Because my face looks really dark on camera. No, no, leave it. I'm done with that webinar, so you can turn it off. Yeah, turn it off. Thank you. One second. No, I haven't looked at any email.